everyone, Adison Evans here. How's it going? Before we get started on today's subject, I would really like to thank everybody who's subscribed to the channel and supported it over the past few weeks. I really appreciate your kind words, comments, and shares. So that's been really nice. Thank you. Today I wanted to answer a question that I get a lot, and that is, how did I start working with Beyoncé, working as her saxophonist in her band? And I'll tell you that story, but if you're a musician and you're checking out this video, be sure to stick around to the end of this video because I'd like to share some booking tips, because when I'm not touring with Beyoncé, I'm actively booking my band and reaching out, and also working a lot as a side person here in New York. So I would like to share some of my experience and some of the tips that I've come up with over the past few years on that. But first, the story. I moved to New York when I was 17 to go to the Juilliard School to study jazz saxophone performance. And when I moved here, I met a saxophonist named Tia Fuller, and she is the original member of Beyoncé's band, the original alto saxophonist. And I met her just from, knowing like, oh, there's another female saxophonist, and oh my gosh, she's killing it. And so I really look up to her. Fast forward a few years, and Tia invited me to her birthday party, and that's where I met Crystal Torres, the trumpet player for Beyoncé. And I was still in school, and a few weeks later, I actually, through school, I met this contractor, and she offered me a gig to play with Trisha Yearwood at Radio City Music Hall just for one night. And she needed a trumpet player, and she didn't know who to call. I said, hey, I just met Beyonce's trumpet player a few weeks ago. She's really great. Let me give her a call. So I did. So Crystal did the gig. Fast forward a few months, and Beyoncé needed another saxophone player on the video Countdown. And so Crystal called me and said, hey, are you available for this video shoot? It's 2 days, come up and do it. So I said, great. And so that was my first introduction to Beyoncé, and that was 5 years ago. And after that, I was still in school, and then a few months later, I found out Tia was leaving the band. They were looking for a new alto saxophonist. And so I had already gotten to know Crystal Torres and Kat Rodriguez, the tenor saxophonist of the band. And as a horn section, they put my name in a hat, basically. And so I was contacted by Beyoncé's music director and said, hey, send in a video of you playing and dancing. And I was like, what, dancing? So anyway, I did. I just sent in a video. I have to find it somewhere. It's really funny, I'm sure. But I remember I just got out of yoga class across the street from Juilliard, and I was, all sweaty, no makeup, my hair was like out to here, frizzy, and they said, you need to send in this video, send it in now, she's reviewing them, and just send it in. And I was like, well, I don't even look presentable, I don't even have a saxophone on me. So I went to the 5th floor of Juilliard, where a whole bunch of jazz musicians were practicing, and I asked one of my friends if I could borrow his tenor and his setup and everything, and I had a pair of heels in my locker. So I just looked like a mess, and I played an instrument that wasn't even my own. And then I asked my friend if I could borrow their alto, so I was like, oh, okay. So I ended up playing, and she liked me, I guess, because then I started touring with her. So my first gig was at the Wynn, Las Vegas, for a New Year's Eve gig, and then I played the Super Bowl in 2013 in New Orleans, and then accompanied Beyoncé on the Mrs. Carter Show World Tour, and then the On the Run tour with Beyoncé and Jay-Z. And it's been amazing. Playing with Beyoncé was something that was never even on my radar. I wasn't even expecting a call or anything. So, and it just purely came from just knowing the girls in the band and just, forming a friendship with them, and that came organically. And so that's how things worked out with that. But when I'm not playing with Beyoncé, I am actively booking my band. So when I do that, my first piece of advice is when you're approaching a venue, have everything together, right? Have everything ready to go. Obviously have, you know, some snippets that the person can hear, YouTube videos, have a website, have a really decent looking website, have a short, concise, and an efficient bio, and some, you know, press quotes or whatever, but have it all in one place and have it very short and concise, because you need to imagine this from the venue's perspective, right? Imagine how many emails they're getting every day and how full their voicemail boxes must be. So when you're sending out an email, an EPK or whatever, make sure, you know, whatever your email subject line is, make sure it stands out in whatever that means to you. And then have the email be short, because people aren't going to take the time to read it. And another thing that I found helpful is if there's a venue that you like to play at, and if that venue has a jam session, maybe one night a week or something, go to the jam session and just make yourself seen and heard, and get to know whoever books there and say, listen, I've got this project, here's my album, here's my EP, I've played here, I've played with this person, you know, and just really form a relationship like that. If there's somebody that you'd really like to play with, and I would just suggest learning all of their music, you know, if get to know whoever plays your instrument in their band and say, listen, I've learned all this music, I learned it from the records that you guys put out and I really love it, and if you ever need a sub, let me know, I'd really love to do it. And on the other side of things, you could actually talk to whoever the artist is and say, listen, if you're, you know, for jazz musicians, this sometimes works. If you're ever looking to rehearse new music, I'm available, I would love to play. I've learned the music from your first 3 albums or whatever, you know, and that kind of lets somebody know that you're serious about their music and really into it, which is obviously really important if you want to be a working member of that band. When I'm home and I actually don't, if my schedule's kind of open, I actually really like playing restaurant gigs. And honestly, the way I do that is you just have to ask, you know, I go through Yelp, and if a restaurant is offering live music, I'll contact them and be like, hey, you know, I've got this little trio and we love to play jazz standards, and I'm sure your patrons would love it if we came and played. And of course, when you're dealing with that, if the restaurant actually replies to you and says, sure, let's have you over here, make sure you have a number in your head as far as what you're expecting for compensation. You know, obviously you need to make it worth your while. However, I really like restaurant gigs because there's something about, there's no pressure because people aren't really listening, they're enjoying their dinners, and it just gives me a chance to play with other musicians and, you know, probably get free dinner and hopefully some cash out of it. So that's always good. But when you're booking gigs, you know, really be creative. A lot of times, as musicians, we need to really create opportunities for ourselves. For instance, you could contact an event planner and say, listen, I've played weddings before, or I'm really good at playing bat mitzvahs or whatever. If you need music for your next event, contact me, and then you could just partner up with event planners and really work a lot that way, because that's a whole thing. Also, I don't know, if you have another passion, like for me, I love to cook. And so I have some favorite chefs of mine around town, and if there's a pop-up restaurant and they're proposing a new menu or something and you're really inspired by the food, compose a suite of music that's inspired by the food and go, you know, pitch it to them. Say, listen, you're opening your restaurant this night, my band is free, we compose this music based upon your food, and we would love to be a part of, you know, the celebration of you opening a restaurant. Whatever it may be, but just be creative. You just have to actively be reaching out to people and venues, get to know different musicians around town, and go to jam sessions. I personally prefer to actually get musicians together at somebody's house and have a session that way, because then you can play all day and just hang out and it's no pressure. Whereas if you go to a venue and go to a jam session, you'll maybe get to play 1 or 2 tunes, and you know, they're always hit or miss. If you just set aside 20 minutes a day to reaching out to venues and people and that kind of thing, I think you'd be on your way. One more thing about reaching out to a venue. Just be prepared. You often will not get a response. And this is where I like to be a little more persistent. So if you're trying to get a gig somewhere and you don't get a response, just contact them the next week and say, hey, listen, I'm following up on, you know, my email from last week. I didn't hear from you, but I'm looking to book my band and blah, 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 blah. Still no response, follow up the next week, follow up the next week, follow up the next week. And then your name will pop up in their inbox enough for them to finally be like, oh, who is this person? And then they click it, and then, you know, hopefully they like what they see, and, you know, they could imagine you at their club, and there you go. But don't get discouraged, you know, because a lot of people are, you know, submitting things to a lot of places to work. So just be persistent. And there's a few things to keep in mind when you're doing all of this. You know, people are really going to be attracted to somebody who's really prepared, who's always on time, who's nice, and who gets along with the other musicians in the band. These are things that are kind of a given. So we always strive to be those things. Alright, well, thanks for watching, you guys. Let me know if you have any questions, comment below, and be sure to subscribe to check out future episodes. And happy booking. See ya.